Welcome back. We've talked about the fact that logos is used by Heraclitus in several different ways to mean the divine organizing principle of the universe, as reason itself, the thing that you have within your mind, and sometimes as the products of reason. So think of an argument, a book, or language in itself. So these are all ways of that Heraclitus in his fragments uses logos. And the last thing that we discussed was how we ought to relate to language, given the basic observation of Heraclitus that what we know for certain is that the world is flux, all is change. You are forever changing. Think of the moment you open this video until now. You're a slightly different you. That's true of all of us. So if everything is constantly in flux and changing, maybe language, comes the intuition, represents a way in which to bring some sort of order to the chaos. Problem is, people often pick up a book thinking that they have the way in which to organize the chaos. Right? That's another way of saying ideology. Rather than relating to language in this unconscious way, whereby you use what was an attempt at the truth to be the truth. Rather than doing that, we should be much more cautious with how we pick up the books, how we write the books, and how we relate to language. And we looked at a few different cases. So we looked at Socrates, never wrote anything down. We looked at Plato. He writes in a dialogue. His works are an invitation to participate in the process of the unfolding of truth, properly understood, I would say. We know that Heraclitus spoke in paradox and aphorisms, and he did so precisely to avoid the trap of language, thinking that language contains the ultimate answers to whatever problem we're looking at. So Emma, we had a back and forth with yourself. You said, does that mean that we shouldn't use language, that we shouldn't trust ideology? I'm saying, and I think following the work of Heraclitus, when you perceive a paradox in this world, whether it's from one of his fragments or you see something paradoxical, the friction that's created in your mind allows the divine spark which you're born with to produce a bit of a fire. Let's call it language, right? So you say something about what you see, you write something about it. I'm saying you should try to, as best as you can, make sense of the world around you and the universe that we're part of, but understand how small our human existence is in the end. It's an attempt. It's a fleeting attempt. Some are more valuable than others. The ones that have a higher degree of value, we have a tendency to try to pass on across generations. But even best case scenario, and here we are looking at the work of Heraclitus, we're passing on the embers. Best case scenario, these are just attempts, nothing more. And I think what's most important is that you start to build some conditions into the way in which you treat language. Be much more careful with it, and don't use it thinking that you've got the truth. He gets out of the trap. There are attempts to get out of the trap by speaking in paradox. Socrates gets out of the trap by never writing anything down. Plato gets out of the trap, let's say, by writing in a dialogue form. Yes? So, thank you for the question. It's an excellent question. Why, if it's all futile, right, if everything is change, why even bother with it? Well, your question assumes that it's a choice, but it's not a choice. You're born with this thing called reason in your head. You open your eyes, you start to process sense data. The moment you see the chaos, you're trying to organize it, right? That's how a baby learns about the world. Think of how you learn language. I don't think it's a choice, Emma. I think it's a function of what we are. In other words, it's an extension of how this universe is organized. So you have a capacity in you to ask questions and to try to make sense of things, knowing that you'll never fully make sense of it all. Does it help you live a more meaningful life? No doubt about it. I mean, if you think about it that way, you can take a lot of pressure off of yourself in many ways, right? Because no matter what you do, you could try your whole life and you'll never fully understand. Some people go crazy. They work themselves into a grave. For what? At the end of the day, thinking that they've got the truth. It's ridiculous. So it helps you avoid a lot of the traps that are set by ideology, right? Ideology is another way of saying set by the trap of thinking that language is a higher form of truth than it actually is. So if we take capitalism as an ideology that we have absorbed, last day we discussed through Bertrand Russell the trappings of capitalism, right? The way that you start to live your life, how you relate to money, what that means to your family, to the people that you love. What is it all for in the end? There's so many traps that we fall into time and again. Why do we fall into them? Well, in large part because we haven't learned the lesson of Heraclitus, which is whatever the ideological presentation, no matter how seductive, it's just an attempt, nothing more than that. So pump the brakes, keep asking the questions, and don't worry about figuring it all out because you will never be able to figure it all out. What brings the meaning? The meaning comes from the fact that some of the things that you say, if you write it the right way, right? If you use language and you relate to language the right way, perhaps it'll be passed on. Here we are with Heraclitus. Does that mean you should write in paradoxes? I'm not sure. But I think the ideas that you cook up in your mind, which are a function of the paradoxes that you see, can extend beyond you if they are of high enough value. The problem is that you're not in control of how they're going to be used and remembered. So, round and around we go. Socrates refuses to write anything down. Heraclitus writes in paradox. Plato writes in dialogue form. They're all trying to escape the trap of other people after them perceiving them in the wrong way. So that's the risk of language. So understand language is, number one, it's a fleeting attempt to understand the world and the universe, number one. Number two, it's also dangerous because it's not perceived as a fleeting attempt. That's the scandal. If we remember anything of Heraclitus, I hope that you remember, of course, fire because of this image. But what does the fire represent? It's the attempt to know, right? It's not a choice. It's built in. But that implies a very important self-imposed discipline that you have to have. How do I use language? How do I relate to language? Maybe the most beautiful idea, which is worth repeating. All things are an exchange for fire. So every person that you relate to, really what you're doing is you're sharing the embers that you've generated. And there's a need to share it. Just as fire is created through friction, it may very well be that the fire is perhaps regulated and balanced through logos itself. So how do you contain the fire? The fire can spread quickly, right? As we know, people in California, are you watching this? So we want to regulate the fire, we want to balance the fire, we want to contain the fire. Language can do that too. So language can have a very positive role to play in containing this fire, which can quickly become out of control. Think of it like a bow or a musician's string, says Heraclitus. You have to have the right tension in order to direct the arrow, or to hit the note. So think of a bow. There's a tension there. The tension enables a contained expression of the fire. The arrow can hit its target. Or a note on a musical instrument that you want to hit. You can only hit it if the right tension is present. So the tension is always there, but it can be contained arguably through language. Another nuanced way of thinking about how we should relate to language. So the goal maybe of language is to maintain the right level of tension. Does that make sense? So the problem with ideology is that it uses language in a way that doesn't pay tribute to that balance, that contained tension, if that makes sense. It's too one-sided. You say, us versus them. We're the good guys, they're the bad guys. That's not tension, that's ideology, of course. Sorry, I've said this many times, I'm not an ideological person, but I hope you see why I'm not an ideological person. Because to say that you're an ideological person just means, or if you're so certain of yourself that what you have is true, you just haven't thought about it enough. That's my suggestion. So there's a kind of deeper unity that's available if we use language to contain the right kind of tension. You now are connecting to a deeper form of unity. So Heraclitus talks about night and day, summer and winter, this balance that's in the universe. There are these tensions that are held. Think of the seasons. So if you can understand how the seasons work on the planet, there's a kind of tension that's forever held, cyclically, right? Similarly, we express this, let's say, in a musical instrument by way of the tension in the strings or the tension of the bow in the bow and arrow. And when you do that, you're connecting to that deeper unity. That's my offering for how you should think about how to relate to the words that come out of your mind, right? It's not a choice. You have to use them. They're there for that purpose. Perhaps human language can only ever be paradoxical and metaphorical. Maybe that's an observation that he's making through these fragments. In other words, language is only paradoxical or metaphorical because we have a finite mind. There's built-in limitations to how we think about the world. So how can we expect language to reflect anything more than that? Best case scenario, maybe it's metaphorical. It's not an accident that I spend a good chunk of time studying the philosophy of art. And I don't know if you remember this, Brandon and Arthur, in the summer we had a discussion about, the chairs, Plato and the chairs, remember? The form of the chair, the instantiation of the chair by the craftsman, and the philosopher, or the painter's version of the chair. And I was saying, and we went around the room, what's the most real? To me, the painter's version is the most real because language is best case scenario, metaphorical. Okay? Here's my favorite part. I saved it for last. We have this divine spark within us. We've talked about it already a little bit. The more we exercise and hone our divine powers of reason, the more we will have a chance to see the divine picture of the universe. So why do you go to school? Well, I hope, and I invite you to consider, what you're really doing when you're in school. You're not just memorizing nonsense and hoping to get a good job at the end of it. You're exercising and honing a divine power of reason that's inside of you. And in doing that, you start to see the universe a little bit better, a little bit more accurately. And you share that with other people. That's part of why we go to school. I think this is lost in our education systems, but there it is. You're a human, right? Anthropomorphically, 200,000 years old. We've been looking out at the same stars for those years. What are we here for? Well, we're here to hone, exercise these faculties so that we start to see the world, ourselves, the universe a little bit more clearly. Nobody's going to have the perfect truth. Forget about that. That's impossible. You're here to advance the conversation a little bit. Best case scenario. I'm saying do so without destroying things, right? Do so in a way that enables progress. And it is possible to have progress. It starts with honing the skills, the divine power of reason that's inside of you, right? It starts with the paradoxical things that we talk about in these classes. It's the friction that the spark can light the fire, or the ember can start to build inside of you. That's the goal. Or that's what should be, I think, the goal with school. Yeah, I think that's what we're built to do. It's like, think of any other animal species. I mean, why do they have what they have? I don't know. There's some sort of mysterious force, evolutionary force behind it, but there it is. We're born with this thing, reason, that's different than other animals on the planet. Other animals have it to an extent. We have it in a specific way. Shouldn't we exercise that? And of course we should, and we should hone those powers to help understand and see things more clearly. Problem I have with our current ideological moment is that it doesn't pay tribute to that. It actually helps reinforce the animalistic side of things. You know, we talked about it in Clive Hamilton's book, Growth Fetish. Everyone's obsessed with more, consume, convenience. Like, I was thinking to myself on the way over here, I don't know, it's a random thought, but I was thinking to myself, like, how much more convenient can this life get? Like, how many more conveniences could you want? I was watching this comedian who's who's making a joke about, like, in a car, you know, you have like two dual climate control, they call it. Anyways, I think part of the cost of our ideology is this thoughtless embrace of convenience and thinking that life is about easy and more. In the process, what you're doing is you're robbing our species of this divine power that we should be honing and exercising. And in doing that, we start to see the world for what it is. I don't know. I think we're very, very lost as a species. It's quite an unsettling time to be a human being, I think, at the moment. So, and unfortunately, our education systems are reinforcing the craziness. More convenience, more cash, more growth, forever growth. Grow our way out of the problem, buy our way out of the problem. And you can get a degree in one version or another version of it. So I think what we need is more Heraclitus. I think we need more of the philosophy of fire, less of the other stuff.